Hello and welcome to Being Well. I'm Forrest, Hanson. If you're new to the show, thanks for joining us today. And if you've listened before, welcome back. When we think about trauma, our minds tend to go to the big, dramatic experiences. And of course, those big experiences can have a huge impact on us. But the field of psychology has increasingly recognized the ways that smaller, less obvious experiences can also have long lasting consequences for people. A common example of this are the relational wounds that we experience in childhood. And the subtle nature of this type of trauma can make it really difficult for people to figure out what's going on. They have a harsh, critical inner voice, maybe low self worth, difficulties feeling safe in their relationships, or maybe just a broader sense of alienation from themselves. But there's not one thing they can point to as a kind of explanation for why they feel the way they feel. Whether you think of yourself as somebody who's experienced trauma or not, many people can relate to that list of symptoms. Of course, there is a lot of variation in how intense these experiences are, and therefore how intense their consequences are. But wherever you're coming from, I think you'll be able to take something away from the series of conversations we're sharing today. These are short excerpts from previous conversations we've had on Being Well with an incredible group of guest experts, and we've organized them to tell a kind of story. Through these conversations, we'll explore some of the common sources of developmental trauma, how trauma can be handed down in families or even as a part of broader social systems, the consequences of that, and how we can start finding our way back to who we really are. I hope you enjoy today's episode. We put a lot of work into this one, and I got a lot of personal value out of going back through and listening to these conversations again. The first talk is with Dr. Lindsay Gibson. It is one of the most popular we've ever done in the history of the podcast, and it explores the impact of having emotionally immature parents who fail to meet your emotional needs. She explains what emotionally immature parenting looks like and traces how it can lead to a deep sense of emotional loneliness and disconnection from yourself. One of the things I really remember from our first conversation that stuck with me is the feeling of inconsistency associated
Oh,
with this.
yes. Thank you.
There's a
Yes.
lot of research that for kids, one of the toughest things to be subjected to is inconsistent parenting.
Yeah.
Sometimes your parent is emotional and attuned and really present for you, and sometimes they are just absolutely not. And it's kind of that combination of variable empathy and then the affective realism that you were talking about. If I feel a certain way, it must be true. Creates this environment where you just kind of feel like you're standing on unsteady ground all the time. And I really remember that piece of it.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. That is a really good description of the experience of the child.
So for somebody who is trying to figure out for themselves, they're going through this process that I was talking about in the intro of creating a coherent narrative or, revisiting their childhood experiences. How do you think that a person can tell, okay, I had parents who had some emotional maturity issues versus my parents were really okay. They were imperfect as all people are, but they were fundamentally okay. It was just that the environment was kind of crazy and chaotic or whatever else was going on. Like, what are some of the things that you could really point to and say, hey, if this is present or not present, that's a really good indicator?
Yeah, that's a really great question because let's say those parents are so preoccupied with getting a meal on the table or finding a
Sure. There's
home to
just a
live
lot
in.
going on in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are many reasons why parents could be inconsistent or in a bad mood or stressed out. Okay, all of that can have a lot of basis in environmental circumstances. All right. But let's look at the things that a person could think about in terms of that parent's actual emotional maturity level. Like if the parent had half a chance, um, do they have the potential? Are they emotionally mature enough to form a good connection with the child and make the child feel emotionally secure? Maybe there's financial insecurity, food insecurity, whatever, but does the child feel that they've got a good connection with their parent? And that's going to depend on that egocentrism part. Is the parent able to take the point of view of the child and focus on that long enough to show real interest in the child? The second thing that I think would be a very important marker would be, is the parent willing to reflect on their behavior and their impact on that child's emotions, and maybe come back and apologize to the child or ask the child some more questions, let the child know that they're sorry that they were so tired they couldn't talk last night, or apologize for yelling at them. These are classic modalities of relationship repair. Okay. So it's not that you never do anything wrong if you're adequately emotionally mature. It's that you have enough feeling for other people and enough objectivity, that you can go back in and try to make things better. And children are, so insightful about when a parent's heart is in the right place and when it matters to the parent how that child feels.
The denial and minimalization parts of it, I think,
Mhm.
are great things to point to. I think another thing that I've heard you say somewhere else, I forget what I was watching at the time, but you said something about if the parent is willing to say, "Hey, tell me more about that,"
Uh-huh.
that's an incredible indicator, kind of right there. If you're just
Absolutely.
interested in the experience as a baseline, as
Yes.
of your kid's experience separate from your own as their own individual being,
Yes.
really good indicator right there.
Yeah, it really is, because it's a capacity.
Yeah.
It's a capacity. And if you don't have it, you won't say things like that. Emotional loneliness means that you're having trouble having a feeling of being seen, being connected with, and being secure in the attention of your parent or the loved one. Children need to feel that somebody's got their eye on them. Somebody's watching out for them. We don't think about that a lot, but if you think back in your own childhood, at least I know I can certainly do this, and other people have told me this as well. You can think of times when you felt very concerned because you didn't feel like somebody was watching out for you, or you felt like you were in a situation where there wasn't adequate attention being paid to you. And it's a very distinct feeling of loneliness and of not being seen. And of course, if we think back to early survival of the human species, what happens to a little person who's not being watched over by their parent or not very connected to an adult? It's a bad thing. So they really feel it. So that emotional loneliness would be one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I also think that the piece of this that's about conforming to the parental expectations or the parental view, a lot of people who come from dysfunctional family systems are really good at figuring out how to bid for what they need from
Mhm.
the people who are around them, particularly this more emotionally immature parent, where the child learns how to approach the parent at the right time, the right body posture, the right tone of voice in order to get what they need, which is that more nurturant response. And you write about this really beautifully when you talk about the construction of a role self.
Yeah.
And I just remember reading that part of it and having it really, really land in how I thought about this.
Yeah, the role self is absolutely essential for the child's emotional well-being. When you're a little kid, you need to know what is the way into your parents' validation, into your parents' attention, and into making the parent turn their energy toward you in an interested way. I mean, that's job number one. So yeah, it's very important to that child that they um, keep themselves interesting to the parent. Also, for emotionally immature parents, they have to be kind of emotionally nurtured and held by the child's attention, which
Mm,
sounds really upside down, and it is. But that's because of the level that they're operating on in terms of their own emotional needs, which have probably been unmet. And so the parent expects the child, like they expect everybody, to help them manage their emotions, soothe them, make them feel better, and also buff up their self-esteem. Make them feel like they're important, make them feel like they're okay. And that insistence on the parent's part of being kind of taken care of is what I call the emotionally immature relationship system. That you are responsible for my emotional regulation and you're responsible for me feeling good about myself. So if you're a child, you know that you have a very big job to do and that it's not going to go well for you or anybody in the rest of the family if you decide just to be yourself and do whatever it is that you feel like doing in the moment, because the repercussions are going to be so severe if you have a parent that depends on the child for that kind of stability and support.
Is there a kind of process that you've seen people go through in your work with them where they start to find and reclaim more of an authentic sense of who they are? And how does that work for somebody? Like, what's the normal arc to that work?
Oh, that's such a good question, because it's such a beautiful process in therapy. It can be an arduous process
Yeah.
for the therapist anyway, because the therapist is, asking, how did you feel about that? What was that like for you? What was going on for you in your body? Where do you feel that in your body? And the client is saying, I don't know, I feel it in my head, I guess. Or they'll tell you what they think instead of what they feel. They're really, by the time they come to your office, lots of times these adult children have been trained to be so out of touch with their own feelings and the way that things are affecting them in order to provide this support to the parent. They really kind of don't know what you're talking about. And they really do hear when you say, how did that make you feel? They say, well, I thought that, or it made me start thinking that. It's like, well, wait a minute, let's go back to how you felt. And lots of times you get a deer in the headlight looks.
Yeah. One of the most common questions that we get on the podcast is we'll say something like, okay, a great tool here is to, connect with your values, or it's some ACT stuff, for example, like you connect your values, you let your actions flow from what your values are, from your sense of what the authentic self is inside. And one of the most common questions we get is like, but I look inside and I have a tough time seeing anything. Like, what do you mean by authentic self?
Absolutely, because the self is built and comes online and is supported by your interpersonal relationships. Okay. So if you have a very self-absorbed, self-preoccupied parent who doesn't really have a lot of interest in the internal world of that child, of their world of feelings or even reactions, then you're going to have difficulty getting to know yourself, especially your emotions, especially your emotional self, because you have to learn about emotions through somebody older and wiser than you telling you that this sensation that you're having right this second is called anger, or it's called love, or it's called impatience, or, irritability, whatever it is. We just feel, I think somebody once said there are like 4 sensations that we feel. And the combination and intensity of those physical sensations, we put these labels on like they're real things. Okay, but they're not. They're just states that we've identified, and we teach our children, hopefully, to be able to identify them in themselves, so that if I ask you, how did that make you feel? They feel the sensations and they say, oh, I was really angry. That really ticked me off, because they read the stomach clench, they feel their jaw, they feel the tension, they feel hot, and they know that is called anger. But when you have a parent who can't do that kind of mirroring, and certainly isn't interested in doing the kind of, intricate parsing of the difference between irritability and anger and rage, say, then there's a blank there. They really kind of don't know what you're talking about. Now, I don't mean to make them sound like robots, because plenty of people have ongoing relationships and do just fine without being able to have a real discussion about their internal experience. We might say that the American culture is kind of geared that way because everything is emphasized for the externals, like the excitement or the thing that you do or the activity or how you look. Very external world we live in. So when a person begins that process of reconnecting with their feelings and their intuitions, they often feel very awkward. I've asked people, well, can you give me an image of what you felt like? Like, is there a metaphor that you could help me understand your experience? And they say, I don't do that imagery stuff. I'm no good at it. I've tried it. I'm no good at it. It's like, yes, you are, because you have a right hemisphere like I do. And there's no way that you're not an image maker because you dream every night, and you think about the future in terms of images. No way that you don't have that. But they say they don't have it because they mean they don't use it. And they've been discouraged from using it because it makes them more individual. It makes them harder to manage as a child. And so they've learned to tune their own self out. And our job as therapists is to, help them come back in and discover what's really going on inside them. And it's such a beautiful thing for us to have people grow and be able to communicate vividly in imagery so that I and other people can catch their feeling and know what is going on inside them. And the release of energy and spontaneity that brings just opens you up for better and better relationships because you allow yourself to be known, really, by the other person.
There are so many ways that I could take this here, and I have so much curiosity. There's like so much I want to ask you about it. I think maybe a place to start here would be trying to get kind of pragmatic about this and to give you sort of a practical example. So let's think about this like a real person. This is a real person who has a hard time opening up and accessing particularly some of these more intense emotional experiences that you're describing. Probably particularly intense feelings of anger and frustration on the one hand, and intense feelings of sadness and vulnerability on the other hand. Those are often the two poles that are kind of like shunted off for a person. They tend to take a lot of responsibility and kind of blame themselves for what happens, maybe in some ways having internalized that from their parent. They're probably pretty sensitive and pretty perceptive about what's going on in other people. But for whatever reason, that function, like looking at themselves, is sort of shut down a little bit. Maybe they don't have like the same granularity. They've been really monitoring the external figure for a long time, but they haven't necessarily learned how to monitor their own internal world.
That's beautifully put.
Oh, thank you. And so this person walks into your office. You're working through a process with them. Where do you start? Where do you want to go?
Well, they've come into the office for a reason.
Yeah.
And 99.9% of the time, it's got some emotion associated with it. I mean, we don't come to a therapist's office until we're bothered by something. So that's, a very logical and easy place to start is start talking about what the problem is or what's been going on, and then ask questions about how that felt or what was the hardest part about that, or what is the thing that they would do differently if they could go back. What do they wish that the other person would have done differently? What do they want most from the relationship? I mean, we start to ask these questions that have to be answered from the inner world. And that begins to turn the person. It's almost like you have a person facing one way and you're taking them by the shoulders and sort of, turning them to look another way. And they're sort of saying, well, there's nothing over there. So we don't have to worry about that because there's nothing over there. I just need to know what to do. Like, you won't know what to do until you know what you feel and you have that internal guidance that you can trust. So we're trying to introduce them to the idea that their inner world is precious. It is trying to guide them toward an emotionally fuller and more satisfying life. And that this is an awkward, kind of an awkward period in skill building if you haven't done this before. It feels unnecessary, it feels uncomfortable, and it isn't immediately apparent what good this is going to do for me to be in touch with my feelings.
I do think that's one of the things that kind of comes up for people is like, well,
Yeah.
why would I want to feel that?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
anger doesn't feel good. That sadness doesn't feel good. That frustration doesn't feel good. I'm pretty well managed right now. What's kind of the upside for me here?
Yeah, the upside is reconnection with
Mm.
yourself and knowing yourself. Self-knowledge is one of the first things that gets undermined by an emotionally immature relationship system. The other person will actively tell you in so many words, it's not worth spending any time on understanding how you feel or what you want or why. That's just so much noise in the machine. We ought to be doing something. We ought to be deciding something. We ought to be moving toward. We ought to be getting. And they convince some of their relationship partners and children that it's not worthwhile to try to go inside and understand how it is that we feel. What I try to bring home to people is that if you don't know yourself and especially your emotional self and what your emotional needs are, you will have trouble with self-confidence. You'll have trouble with decision making, and you probably are going to have trouble with having a sense of belonging, because they seem unrelated on the surface, but self-knowledge and self-awareness underlies those three things in a very big way. And once a person gets a taste of how that self-knowledge leads to a sense of security and confidence and a feeling of finding the people that they belong with, then it all makes sense to them, but it doesn't at first.
In this next conversation, Rick and I expand on the concept of developmental trauma with Bessel van der Kolk. He's the author of The Body Keeps the Score. He explains what internalized abuse is, why children tend to do this, the consequences this has later in life, and ways that we can recover from it. You've told a lot of stories in your work about people who come to you and they start saying, well, I had a normal childhood or a happy childhood, or I had pretty good parents. Then you peel back the layers of the onion a little bit and it turns out that they were physically abused or sexually molested or whatever other incredibly painful experiences that they had to go through. And we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast in the past. So why is it, do you think, that people go through that process of internalized abuse and blame themselves for the bad things that have happened to them?
That is, once you have a developmental point of view,
Yeah.
there's nothing surprising about it. Huh? And I think it's really important to really hang out a lot with kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really see how human beings develop. Yeah. And so a little baby has no idea where it is and who it is. And that little baby gets to understand who it is from the way it's being treated. Mm-hmm. The only experience they have. So if they're being told, oh, I wish I couldn't have an abortion, but the Supreme Court told me I could not have an abortion, so I had you against my wishes, and I'm really sorry you were born, that becomes a part of who you are. Yeah. I'm an unwanted person, and I'm no good, and I'm a blot on the existence of the world, and that is going to be a very hard map to change. And that's not like, oh, how can you be so stupid or self-centered? No, that is how the brain develops. The brain is a map of the world that you develop on the basis of your experiences. And so if your experience is that you're unwanted, bad, worthy of being beaten up, that is who you become. And how do you change that? It's not by, it wasn't your fault. At some point, people say, I know it wasn't my fault, but I still feel like I'm an unwanted blot on the earth. So you need to actually have experiences that are different. It turns out that psychedelics are very good for that.
Yeah.
I have not sent off that paper yet, but I was the PI on the large recent MDMA study, and our data are really stunning in terms of how it's actually the single most impressive thing I've seen in terms of a capacity to overcome developmental trauma. So that people develop a sense of compassion for the creature who they were back then, and they can get a perspective of, oh, that's what that kid went through, and that's why this kid is so angry and upset. And then you can also get a sense of, I'll take care of that kid. I'll give that kid what it didn't get before. So psychedelics tend to be really a major new treatment in that regard. But trauma really messes up your brain. It messes up connections, your capacity to attend and to organize. And so neurofeedback can also be extraordinarily helpful to just help that system to calm itself down enough so you actually know who it is, who you are. Like, not just a bundle of emotions, but you really get a sense of, oh, now he needs to go to sleep. Or now, so you get a sense of interiority, of making it safe to be who you are in a way.
Right. And people often have fears about that, getting in touch with themselves in that way and bringing that kind of nurturance to themselves.
Yeah. Much of trauma stuff is, look what you did to me, but look what people did to you. Yeah, that's all true. But you treat yourself probably as badly as the perpetrators. And so most traumatized people carry an internalized shame and self-hatred that is profound.
Yeah, as Forrest was pointing out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the things that I forget if I was reading this and The Body Keeps the Score, or if I heard you say it somewhere else, but I just think it's really so poignant that somebody wants to stay in relationship with their family of origin to such an extreme degree that they're willing to tell a story that includes themselves being the bad guy, essentially. Like, this bad thing happened to me, and it happened to me because I was bad, not because my parents were bad or my family was bad or there was this messed up stuff going on out in the world. And we just have such a desperate desire, like you're saying, the vulnerable child who knows nothing other than what it needs to receive in order to survive. Like, that's what you have to do.
Your father and son.
Yeah.
No, you haven't run away.
Yeah, totally. Thankfully, it didn't go through those experiences. But yeah, no, absolutely. You want to stay in that relationship.
I can hear the pride in which you identified yourself as father and son.
Yeah.
Because your sense of agency, of pride, of competency is very much like, my dad and I really get along very well.
Totally.
And so you are privileged.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And of course, this feeling of belonging is such a fundamental human need.
Yeah.
That if you get abused by the people from your tribe, you are faced with this terrible existential dilemma. That is, I don't envy anybody, is, do I stick with the tribe I belong to that gives me an identity and a feeling of belonging and a name and a gravesite and all sort of stuff.
Yeah.
People to celebrate Thanksgiving and birth with, or do I go off on my own and start a new life? It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And anybody who does it has nothing but my greatest respect. And most people, we see it in our political system right now, and they would rather hook up with dangerous and frightful people rather than saying, no, I'm going to go off by myself.
Yeah, I think often that children, I've worked with a lot of children, including some who've been traumatized, and There's this fateful choice in the mind of a young child, I think, in terms of, and including a very young child. I did my dissertation on 15-month-olds, and basically the choice is they're crazy or I'm crazy. They're bad or I'm bad. And most children make a fateful choice that they're bad, they're crazy, to maintain that bond and sense of orderliness in the world.
Yeah, they don't have a choice because they don't know alternatives.
Yeah, exactly.
Either.
Yeah.
Later on, you can say, oh, other people do it differently. When you're 3 or 4, you have no idea that there is other worlds besides that. But I think a very important element in recovery is the sooner a kid gets to realize, oh shit, I chose the wrong parents.
Yeah. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's very, very haunting, isn't it?
Yeah, and for a kid to you're 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, you say, my parents are crazy and they go to do weird things and I need to protect myself. That's a very hard, major issue to conclusion to come to. Is that I'm here by myself and I just need to keep myself under control while all this terrible stuff is going on around me. What a challenge, And indeed, essentially about creativity.
Yeah.
A lot of people become very creative in solving it. They become creative by cutting themselves.
Yeah.
For example, which is one act of creativity because they discover that by cutting myself, I can feel calmer. I feel less scared.
Yeah.
And so people sometimes find very odd ways of coping, but all of these coping things started off as a way of somehow desperately keeping it together. So, when people talk about resilience, my reaction is always everybody who's traumatized is resilient in their own way. Some of the adaptations are more acceptable socially or more productive financially than other adaptations are. But all these adaptations are creative adaptations in order to somehow survive what's going on.
There's been, as we've said a couple of times during the conversation already, a ton of research on psychedelics recently. We had Albert Garcia Romeo from the Johns Hopkins lab on the podcast to talk about psychedelic-assisted therapy for smoking cessation and addiction in particular, but it's been studied for a whole bunch of different things. And alongside all of that research, there's been a lot of breathless kind of public conversation about the possibilities inherent in psychedelics. Do you think that there's an alignment between the hype that psychedelics are receiving and the actual research findings right now? Or do you think that people are getting a little breathless about the whole thing? What's your take?
What I tell my colleagues and friends is that we are in this wonderful innocent phase of honeymoon.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've been there before. We had the innocent phase when we first invented PTSD and everybody talked to everybody else who was doing things and nobody had the answer because there was no money yet. And as long as there's no financial reward, people can be honest.
Yeah.
But the moment there's grants at play and if you get your office in the basement or get 5 offices on the top floor of the building, money is always a piece. And once money gets involved, which is about to happen in psychedelics, the place usually gets beaten up. And I'm not very optimistic about the future, actually, because the research through MAPS that we're doing, we have had no side effects. These are powerful drugs. People have very, very painful lives, horrible lives. And basically, people across the board have done extraordinarily well. People who, when we enrolled them in the study, I often said, fasten your seatbelt, God help us. And then people got better. But the study is so careful. People have samples all times, there are videotapes, they get looked at, there's preparation. It is so, so careful. And I think the moment that we stop being careful, the horse is going to leave the barn, and there's going to be a lot of bad effects. Because when psychedelic therapies, it's not like, oh my God, I see God. Some people do, but a lot of people see their trauma. And it can be very, very painful. I know that also from my own experience. This is not fun and games. And if you don't have the right setting where people are being contained and helped, this is going to cause a lot of bad stuff. And so Dublin and other people are really working very hard on how can we manage and control it, but it's going to be a major challenge.
So is your concern, Doctor, just so that I really understand what you're saying here, that people are going to hear essentially, oh, this is a panacea, it's a miracle drug, and they're going to consume it in a setting where they shouldn't be without proper supervision, without really thinking about it ahead of time, getting good psychological support, and that's going to lead to some problems with people? Am I saying that back to you correctly?
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. It's also, it is capitalism. It's happening already. So ketamine is already legal as an anesthetic substance. It's quite a good psychedelic agent. Actually, I helped Phil Wolfson to run CAP trainings, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Very exciting, very interesting. We do see some very painful experiences there, actually.
People who have been through very, very difficult experiences, as we've said over and over again, have a hard time moving into those more flexible, imaginative spaces for a whole bunch of different understandable reasons. They were unsafe, they were punished for them, whatever. What have you found tends to support people in like initially resourcing themselves to be able to engage some of those processes or take on some of those interventions?
Well, I go back to this resiliency issue, is that everybody finds ways of surviving.
Yeah.
And I started that. How have you managed with this? And then you come into another really interesting observation, is that most of the great changes in the world for the better have been made by traumatized people. You know, when you read the biographies of Isaac Newton, for example, oh my God, what horrendous childhood he had. So he escaped into mathematics. Oprah Winfrey, Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu, now on and on and on. If you come from trauma, you also come from a position, hopefully, where you say, the world cannot continue to go on the way it is. And if you come from a really enjoyable family, maybe you guys, you hope to change the world, but you don't. If you come from a nice family, there's no urgency to change the world because you'll be okay anyway.
Yeah, totally. Pressure isn't the same.
And so trauma is also a tremendous impetus to change the world. For example, after the Second World War in Europe, one damn world war after another, killing millions of people, they said, we need to have income equality. We need to have social security. And Europe totally changed as a result of the Second World War, following Roosevelt's hope for America. Too bad Roosevelt died too young, so he never got to implement in America universal healthcare, universal education. But those ideals came as a result of the Second World War, of people saying, man, we are just committing suicide. We cannot go on this way anymore. And of course, America right now, we are in some ways committing suicide. And I wonder when we're going to wake up and say, guys, we are killing ourselves.
Do you think that knowing that, just like knowing that story of the ways in which people are able to persevere and overcome and create powerful things out of those experiences, do you think that that helps them? Or do you think that more of like a felt experience is necessary?
I think I see a lot of people, and I see it in my world also, who really use their own trauma to become altruistic and to try to change school systems and mental health systems. But you need to be in touch with it.
Yeah.
And as long as you say, oh, this person is just crazy, they're starving themselves and they need to feed them, or this person is crazy, they mutilate themselves, and don't understand what this is for, then you will condemn people and you will not open it up. But, if you start celebrating, like, wow, you learned that starving yourself makes you feel calm, what else can we do so that you can actually keep your body alive and feel safe at the same time? That becomes, but as long as you don't understand what this is about, people tend to be punitive. And our society is very complex. We see amazing compassion side by side by amazing punitive systems. Our society is still flexible enough and hopeful enough that in the midst of all this stuff that's happening, there are thousands of people and organizations who are really doing amazing things.
In this conversation, we take a step back and focus on the intergenerational nature of trauma with Dr. Mariel Buqué. In addition to exploring the various ways trauma gets passed down through the generations, Dr. Buqué offers ways to repair and recover, both individually and with members of your family. So you're describing a pattern here that you had. You had some anxiety, you had some concern with the people and the things around you. You mentioned not skimping on therapy, which makes me suspect that you're a saver in other areas of your life. You could see, where these various things might come from. And I'm wondering how this connects to your broader area of expertise on intergenerational trauma and how you think about these tendencies as being passed down in various kinds of ways.
The more that I actually dig into my family tree, the more that I'm able to see that suffering was the status quo every single living day of my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents' lives. And when I think about my own childhood and the fact that I don't recall ever feeling at ease in literally since the moments that I had consciousness of my own self, that helps me to understand, you know what? This was something that was there even before I could verbalize a word, right? Like it was present in me. And that is the case for a lot of us. A lot of people, when they come to me and we start telling stories of pre-verbal or, newly verbal experiences, they start saying, I was told that I was hard to soothe. I was always, somebody that, or I'm a crier, right? Like, the tender souls of the world. And I always get very curious when people tell me that because that was language I used to use for myself. And I'm like, tender, that, if you're just tender by nature, right? Let's talk about who else was tender in your life? Who else had that like propensity to feel big emotions? And when we start peeling the layers, both in my own life and in the lives of my clients, there's always this through line of, oh yeah, my parents, they suffered such and such. I continue to unearth a lot of new stories in my own family. Just this week, my sister and I had a conversation with my mother, and we were holding space for her. My mother is cheerful and calm in how she expresses the story. My sister is holding back tears because it's such a sad story of my mother's childhood. And I'm sitting there kind of self-soothing, by just like remaining calm and present for my mom and then also for my sister. And I'm looking at all of us and I'm like, these stories, the story needed to be told. My mother needed to say, I didn't feel loved, right? Like she needed to say that, and that needed to feel itself into, our conversation. But, when I think about my mother coming from that kind of childhood, it makes a lot more sense to me why I didn't feel settled. And I felt like I needed a lot of love, like a lot of it. Sometimes when we have these conversations with our elders, it allows us to also learn about ourselves.
Well, you're talking about like the different ways that we pass a pattern down, if that kind of makes sense. Like it takes a lot of different forms. A lot of the time in the kind of classic Western psychology literature, there's a focus on behavioral patterns, right? You watch your parents do things a certain kind of way, so you just sort of mimic how they do things. But you're talking about these other ways that this kind of transference happens, like through the story of a community, through the tales that we tell about ourselves or the people around us or the kind of people that we are. We could even get into like some epigenetic stuff around like gene expression and how the experiences that people back in our lineage, particularly grandmothers, go through can impact us in different kinds of ways. And so there are all these tools that are not they're not fuzzy in nature. They're like pretty well understood in terms of how this kind of thing can happen.
Yes, and and I think that it's important for us to have that understanding. I think we have done humanity a disservice in not being able to help orient us as a global whole around the fact that the ways in which our genes are, in essence, manufactured starts 2 generations prior to us even being born. And the fact that, our grandmothers especially like are holding our parents at 5 months gestation with already the precursor cells that we would have already developed into. And the fact that there are 3 bodies existing in one at a particular point in time, taking in the same sensations, the same stressors, right? Like the fact that all of that is also a part of the initial structuring of our genes is a really important detail for us to know. We know a lot more about how that process actually leads to physical health complications or disease and the genetic ties there. We have not paid as much attention to the ways in which it happens from an emotional standpoint as well. And some, I even look at some of the children that are in our society now, and some of the language that happens cross-generationally, where adults and especially grandparents are like, they're so sensitive. And if we really look at what the adults have gone through and the fact that a lot of those emotional wounds have gone unaddressed because we didn't have structures in society, to say like, oh, mental health is a thing. You can go to therapy and you can like, work on your wounds. We didn't have those systems in place in the ways that we have for physical health. And so if you look at it from the lens of intergenerational strain that's passed down generations, of course, the next generation is going to be more tender. Of course, they're going to be sensitive. It makes a lot of sense from a biological standpoint, even.
Our families are the ones who have known us the longest, and therefore, these are the systems that are the most resistant to change. You have the most water that's under the bridge with these people. And I can think of like my sister. I've known my sister her whole life. She's a couple years younger than I am. I got a lot of water under the bridge with her. And I still remember her when she was 12 and 13. And I've had to kind of update my understanding of her as time has gone on. But there's still a part of my memory that's tied to that younger piece. So for people who are doing this work inside of that like family context, it can often be really hard to get a lot of like change energy going just because the system has become so entrenched. And I'm wondering what you've seen about that.
Yeah, it is incredibly hard. You're absolutely right. I don't understate that at all with this work, which is why the work I always call courageous, because we really have to step into courage on a daily basis. And what I mean by courage is we have to kind of step also into vulnerability, which I see as courage. We have to help ourselves to really step into the places that still have deep wounding and that keep us in a specific kind of dynamic with the folks in our lives. And really almost kind of face them, right? I myself, I grew up with a sister who she and I actually didn't get along until she reached the age of 30. And I was 27. And, her parentification and having to take care of me made it so that she felt like I was a burden to her. And I was, just loved my big sister, but always felt rejected by her. So there was a bit of a tension there. Now she's like my best friend, but we had to do, some hard work. We had to have honest conversations about the pain that was caused, even as children, right? Because of the ways that our family was structured and the things that needed to take place that placed burdens on us as children. We needed to have those dialogues, and they felt gunky, muddy, ugly, messy. They had little structure. They were long-standing. They weren't just one conversation tied in a bow. And when we can actually express that this is the way that it looks, I think that it can help free us a bit more from the fear that we hold around even having them. More often than not, people think, okay, this conversation is going to look this way. And they come to realize that it doesn't. And there's a sense of disappointment there. And then other emotions that also come alongside that. And I think that also is a hindrance for us. We need to have a clear understanding of how ugly these conversations can look. They are not pretty. It's not that they're, they might be violent, not that, but that they just reflect pain. At the other side of that, there is opportunity for connection. Sometimes there isn't, and we have to acknowledge that too. And we have to grieve the parts of our family that are immobile, are unchangeable, are frozen, the individuals or the characteristics. And we have to, in essence, like almost kind of like attend a funeral of the people that we wish they could be. And we have to step into an understanding of who our true family is, with all of their flaws, all of their capacities to hurt us, all of their, shortcomings, and engage almost kind of like in a new relationship with the individuals that are truly in front of us. And none of that feels great at the beginning. Grief doesn't feel great. And even grief that is in our minds that we have to construct, right? Because we forget that there is a loss. You're losing the individual that you held on to, and you have to kind of like reconstruct a new relationship. So all of that is very complex work, and it is hard work. So I always like to, always preface intergenerational work with the understanding that this is not easy, and it is very likely to not look like a picturesque kind of conversation, quite the opposite.
So I would love to get kind of I don't know if an example is quite the right way to put it, but like a thought from you on like how this work actually works with people when you're doing it. Like, what are some of the resources that you're giving them? What are some of the tools that tend to help? Is there a process that this normally takes for people? Like, what does this really look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love the question. The work itself is variable in length according to the person, the layers, right? And also if people want to do a long-term process of like integrating the lessons into their lives. So that's a little bit more fluid. However, the actual structure of the work tends to feel fairly similar across the board.
Great.
And some of the best models that I have seen for trauma-based work have been structured around like phasic models, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Mm-hmm.
So although I didn't explicitly say that within the actual work that I do keep that in mind, that we are working in phases. The very first phase, believe it or not, is not digging into the layers of our family tree. It's actually grounding ourselves. It's settling the nervous system. It's getting to a place where we actually do deep breathing by default. It's getting to a place where we have lifestyle changes that actually integrate holistic practices within our lives in a very nuanced way, and almost in a way that it doesn't need to feel like an added task, but it is simply a way of living. So I start there. I start with really a full system approach with every single person, and just like reorienting them around a different way of being so that they can befriend their bodies, and they can actually have a body and a nervous system that isn't working against them, and a body and a nervous system that is feeling like it's being nourished and cared for and being more regulated and more at ease, so that when we start getting into phase 2, which is the digging work, which is actually building out the intergenerational trauma tree, actually engaging in an intergenerational adverse childhood experiences assessment to get a sense of all of the different layers of wounding. And like when we start excavating those wounds, it can feel really heavy. So if we don't actually have a system in place ahead of time that actually helps the person to ground and sustainably so, then we're actually going to be reopening wounds that can feel re-traumatizing. So phase 1 will always be that grounding element. Phase 2 would be, of course, the excavation and like really getting into the details of what happened here through the generations. Phase 3 is integration. So it's really taking in a lot of the ways in which all of those wounds have then transpired into actual thoughts, behaviors, relationship dynamics, ways to approach life, work, children, like all of the different ways in which now those wounds are translating into the ways in which you've operated in life, and actually getting an understanding of how to then start cutting them at the root. We're cutting the behaviors. We're doing things differently. We're finding alternatives to how you can be and manage life that doesn't reflect the cycle keeping process that you were engaging in before, even if it was subconscious. but that actually reflects how you're building a legacy that's different and moving forward in the direction of building health and abundance in your life.
I would, if you're up for it, I would love to essentially just like walk through each of these three phases a little bit. And because I'm sure people are listening and they're like, sounds great. How can I start doing this? So I would love to start at the beginning. Like, what are some of the resourcing tools? Sometimes people use that kind of language. I don't know if you prefer, resourcing or grounding or soothing, or everybody's got their own word. What are some of the ones that you tend to come back to, or maybe that have been particularly helpful for you?
Yeah, both on a personal note and also that I integrate into my practice has been the practice of sound bath meditations. And for anyone not familiar with what that is, they are Tibetan-derived practices that actually infuse singing bowls that emit specific frequencies that actually make it so that both on a mind and body level, we actually experience greater calm and ease. So it made sense, for that to be a natural segue into, some of that grounding kind of resourcing work in my practice. I want to make it so that people are able to do the work on a continuous basis, because I get a lot of, I'm a busy mom, I'm a CFO. And so when we can make these practices accessible, people are more likely to integrate them into their lifestyle. So when I talk about like doing, in essence, like kind of like homework, I talk about doing breath work, doing humming, and doing rocking. And breath work, it's been popularized enough that I think a lot of us understand the ways in which, the breath is an actual powerful tool that we all have that can actually regenerate our bodies in a multitude of ways, but also help us to create new synaptic connections inside of our brains and nervous system that are structured towards health and structured towards ease and calm. So there's that, right? And then there is humming, which if for all of us, we have like a part of our nervous system that actually helps us to relax and release. There's a part of our nervous system that helps us to understand, oh, there's a threat coming. Once the threat passes, the other part comes in and says, we can relax, go back to balance, we're okay. And so there are ways that we can actually stimulate that cranial nerve, which is called the ventral vagal nerve. And the stimulation can be done through humming, more specifically through humming in low tones. But sometimes even like with kids, I tend to just say like, what's your favorite song? And we hum the song, or I, give them. So it's a way to really kind of integrate the practice into someone's day. If somebody's driving to work and they listen to 5 songs on the way to work, they can hum the songs instead of singing them. And they're already baking it into their day. And the third is rocking, which also has a ventral vagal stimulation process that it initiates. And I like to also, like I rock and I sway from side to side naturally by default now. But, for anybody who thinks that might be something maybe like a little weird, what I like to also reference to is, hey, think back to when you were a kid. Let's say a baby and just a toddler. Somebody was rocking you to sleep. Why did that work? It worked because it helped to soothe you and it helped your nervous system to feel at ease and relax, and it stimulated your ventral vagal nerve. There's an actual function there, and it actually helps and it works even in our adult lives. So if you can emulate that, then you're already giving yourself that soothing experience that you're going to need.
In this next conversation, we'll explore one example of intergenerational trauma within a family system with Elizabeth Ferreira. Elizabeth explains how her complex PTSD can be traced back through her family and shares some of the practical consequences of this. She also discusses strategies she's developed to help her heal, including somatic techniques and claiming her needs. Also, if you're new here, Elizabeth is my fiance. She's a therapist, and she's just one of the best people to talk to about this kind of stuff. Here's our conversation together. I don't talk about feeling lonely very often.
Yeah.
And you talk about feeling lonely pretty frequently. It's a common emotional experience for you, that feeling of internalized loneliness. You're very sensitive to it in a lovely way, because I think that from, again, like wounded healer trope and all of that good stuff, it really helps you relate to other people who are going through similar experiences like that and access the unseen parts of them. We're using a lot of language here from IFS, by the way, if you're not familiar, which is the Internal Family Systems
It's
model
great.
of
You
therapy.
should read up on
it's
it.
great. You should look it up. We've got some episodes on it. Basically, the idea is that people are constellations. They are made up of all of these different aspects or parts inside of themselves, and these parts have complicated relationships with each other. And often people who go through we all do this, but particularly for people who go through difficult experiences, there are parts of them that get underfed inside, and they get exiled and kind of cast out of the group. And then part of the journey is to reclaim those parts in healthier ways.
Yeah.
And so I think that feeling of loneliness could really be that speaking up and kind of coming forward in that way.
Yeah. And just, hearing you say that, like a key piece of me that has been emerging, and I think that to an extent, you've really kind of helped coax into like out of the exiled underverse is my sweetness.
Yeah, for sure.
And like you can kind of hear it if you're listening, but like I'm kind of on the verge of crying, which happens every time I come into contact with anything sweet. And the reason for that is because my sweetness was viewed as something to be teased and taunted in my family. It was like viewed as naive or like too vulnerable. And I think I've learned that sweetness can be very like fierce and kind of potent because everyone in my family has experienced childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And so you have this little kid that's just like by nature extremely sweet and tender. And what that does is then it brings up all the welling inside of yourself that you've had to like pack down and not allow yourself to feel that sweetness because, it can be crushing. And that then ties in with the whole kind of like loneliness bit because I start to like attempt to be more sweet and it makes people uncomfortable. And then I'm super sensitive when people are uncomfortable. So then it reiterates the story of like, I make people uncomfortable. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Which then further makes me feel lonely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you see how these emotional cycles get created inside of stuff, right? Where for you, the emotional experience that wasn't allowed, and there were really two of them. First, anger, where you mentioned you weren't allowed to be pissed.
No.
Even when things happened, that would naturally make somebody, particularly a child, feel pretty angry. And the second one is the sweetness aspect, this very vulnerable underlying emotion. And one of those emotions was too big and strong, and one of them was too soft and squishy.
Yep.
And so those were the ones that got repressed. And okay, now what are we dealing with these days? Those two repressed emotions.
Yep.
So you can kind of think about this if you're listening from your own standpoint and looking back into childhood, regardless of whether or not you would identify as somebody who has complex trauma or not. I would not, obviously, I think pretty clearly. But I can look inside of my own history and go to, okay, what were the emotions that I was really comfy with when I was a kid? And what were the emotions that I felt uncomfortable with? What were the ones that I didn't feel comfortable expressing? Maybe because they were punished by other kids in some way. Maybe because my family was uncomfortable with them. Maybe because my sibling was uncomfortable with them. Or I had a weird experience with an aunt one time, or whatever your story is. Like, that's a great way to find a place to work these days. If you're looking for a way in to unearthing some of this stuff, it's a really, really useful question for me.
Another thing to just throw out there, and I think I needed to have a concrete, almost on paper proof that, this is complex PTSD.
This is me. Yeah,
this is me.
Totally.
And so I found a really great therapist and we were kind of orbiting some things. And at this phase in my development, I was a mess. I was real messy. I was constantly being triggered by my graduate program, which brought me to flashbacks of being a kid and having pretty difficult, challenging experiences, being in my room. School, all of that. And he gave me the Adverse Childhood Experience Scale?
Yeah, ACE.
Yeah. ACE. And I got an 8.
Which is essentially all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shocked me.
Yeah.
It legit shocked me.
Yeah.
And when I saw that number, and then, you know, we were talking about it in therapy together, I'm getting slightly emotional. It was like the part of me that had internalized what my parents had always told me of like, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. Finally got to relax. And then here's a person sitting across from me who's actually attuning to me instead of me attuning to someone else, being like, you're not okay, you know? And I really needed that. I needed that mirroring to happen in order for me to accept the things that have happened to me. When you look at my genogram, you know, which is a way of kind of like tracking all the trauma that has occurred in a family, in many ways, my parents stopped a lot of that from touching me.
Yeah.
But it wasn't enough to get me to like be unscathed by it.
Totally.
And so like, I love my parents. I really value that they stopped a lot of patterns. But when a system is as toxic as mine was, often that insular is not enough.
Yeah.
And you really need to like step away from it and find a really good therapist.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great way to talk about the ways in which generations can hand the baton on.
Yeah.
And the goal is not to, a lot of the time, is not to repair everything that has happened to a person, because these are generational things. People hand the baton to the next generation and they try to put you in a better position than they were in. And it's also what makes the conversation sometimes inside of families so complicated around, this is my experience. Because your felt experience was one way, but compared to their felt experience, it seemed a very different way.
Yeah.
And that's just hard translation. That is a conversational challenge inside of a family for one generation to appreciate, while yes, things may be better, but still there are these challenging experiences that need to be dealt with.
Yeah. And, you know, for me, I think because I was protected in many ways by my parents, at a pretty young age, I was seeing dysfunction that I didn't want to participate in.
Yeah, totally. In the broader family system.
Yeah. You know, and I kind of became there was a phase in my relationship with my broader family where I think I was viewed as the black sheep in some ways, because I just started saying no. I just started saying, no, I'm not going to have a relationship with you.
Yeah.
And that was really challenging, to be the only one in your family who's like consciously seeing these things and going, this is kind of messed up. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think this is what makes my particular kind of soup of complex PTSD a little challenging, because to this day, I still get flashbacks. Like to this day, I can still have moments where, boom, I am right back in a moment in time when something awful happened. And I don't know if those will ever go away. But over time, the thing that I've noticed is that I don't stay in it as long as I did before.
So I'd like to talk for a second here just about symptomology in terms of what your actual experiences are these days.
Yeah.
What are the consequences of this, essentially? And then we'll talk about what we can do about all of this stuff. Does that sound good?
Love it.
So you've mentioned a couple of things so far. You've mentioned emotional flashbacks. So what does that look like practically for you?
For me, it's a very visual and somatic experience. A flashback that I have had often, particularly with grad school, is being like a little kid sitting on my bed and my mom is screaming at me because I didn't do something right as far as homework or something. I can see exactly my childhood room. I can tell exactly where she's sitting, like everything. It's very vivid. And so there are other examples of that. But for me, it's like we time traveled and boom, I'm right there. I can hear her. I can smell her, like boom.
Great. So that's one symptom. It's a very, very common one associated with complex trauma. Another one that you've alluded to is hypersensitivity of various kinds. You also have some sensory stuff that probably contributes to this additionally. What does that feel like to you? Like, what does hypersensitivity mean?
The best way I can describe it is it feels like you're just a raw, exposed nerve going out through the world.
Yeah.
So it's very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time just staying with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of get lost in like an overwhelming sea of sensation. It looks like all of a sudden I've reached overload, and now I'm in a group of people and I'm dissociating real hard because I just can't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or it looks like certain people, I just can't be around them because just how they are like puts me on such edge that I feel sick. Like I feel physically ill around them. Mm-hmm. And to no fault of their own. They could be lovely people. It's just something about how they move, the tone that they have, the quality of their voice, you know, the kind of topics that they bring up. Just
something becomes grating.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So maybe particularly before you started doing some of the work that you've done and inside of this territory, how do you think that the residues of this impacted your relationships with other people?
I was sort of the standard, you know, you got me maybe like 3 years and then I cycle through a totally another community and group of people. I would lean in really quick and hard, and I could make like close friendships, but they would never really last. I protected myself by also being quite angry. And because I would feel like overwhelmed, or I'd start to feel anxious in like a group of people who were my friends. And then it would make me angry. Like, you know, the brain tries to figure out, well, why do you feel alone in a group? Why are you feeling like you can't trust these people? Oh, it must be them. And so I would do that as like a resource, but then the resource ended up doing the exact opposite of what I wanted, which was further alienate me, make me feel far away. I would never trust people enough to tell them how I actually felt.
Yeah, repressed emotion, big one for you, for sure.
Oh yeah, and it would I would repress to a point where I couldn't take it anymore, and I literally couldn't be around them anymore.
Yeah.
Because the fear of telling them how I actually felt was way worse than if I just exited, and it's like, you never see me again. I'm like a ghost.
For starters, there's an enormous amount of self-awareness there.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic.
Yep. We worked hard on that.
And hey, these things are developed over time, you know? And there's a classic line that people use in the academic world, which is research is me-search. Basically, people tend to research the things that are closely related to their own experiences. And I think a part of the reason that you ended up going to graduate school was to explore your own interior and to get better tools related to all of this stuff, and also to work with people and to help people who also struggled with these experiences.
Yeah.
Because that intimacy with the experience, we've talked to so many people on the podcast, Pete Walker, Terry Rial, Gabor Maté, we're going to talk to. And all of these people had their own deeply painful experiences coming up, which is so interesting, and it massively informed the work that they did with other people and gave them a unique perspective that allowed them to be uniquely helpful. Because of one of the things you were saying earlier, when you're hypersensitive, you are intimately attuned to whether or not you feel like you can trust somebody. It's a trust issue.
Yep.
And so being able to say, hey, I haven't walked in your shoes, but I've walked in shoes that are a little bit like yours is just a huge resource for people. What do you do to resource yourself, to calm your system, to feel safe and comfortable again so you can keep on meeting that challenge?
Well, tools that I have in the moment is become aware of your feet. Like if you immediately go, Forrest, can you feel your feet?
Yeah.
You immediately start to ground. And so you start to notice there's a little more weight to the body now when you start to notice your feet, you know, and grounding really helps to start the process of settling the nervous system. So I do that. I will either literally push into my body. I will really pay attention to my feet. I will kind of really feel the weight of my body pooling in my sits bones. Another tool that I use is I shift my awareness. And if something's really overwhelming, I just go, okay, the body has weight and the body breathes.
Mm.
And I don't have to work at it. It's just going to do it anyway. And it's a way of like pulling out of maybe a flashback that's about to happen or critical negative thoughts that are like kind of funneling in a social environment. And now I'm right in the present moment.
Mm.
Another tool that I use if I need like a total settle is I hug people. I have my safe people sometimes in groups. Yeah. I have a couple friends that if I just need to like touch you or get that physical co-regulation happening, I will go there.
Mm-hmm.
And another tool that I do is I've kind of taken it on that time doesn't exist. It's not real. It's a myth. And when I take that in, there's no need to rush.
Yeah.
There's no, because time's not real.
Cool.
And you could call that a healthy dose of dissociation from the pressures of time. But it brings like a humor to it.
Yeah, totally.
And it totally settles my nervous system, especially when I'm like, oh, there's a time. And I'm like, wait a minute, time's not real. And I use that with my clients. Typically, the last 10 minutes of a session is when shit gets real spicy and juicy. And sometimes you get those clients that are very mindful of time and they start to panic about it. And I'll just be like, I don't believe in time. And then they're like, wait, what? And I go, yeah, time doesn't exist. Not here. I go, that's my job. Keep going.
Yeah.
You know?
And it becomes a little pattern break for them also.
Yes.
Totally.
And we always have enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Like the irony is that there's never enough time, but in the moment, there's always enough time.
It's almost like a Zen koan there.
Well, you know, I'm real out there sometimes, Forrest.
There both is, it is not enough time at the same time.
Yeah. But that's like, you know, I take a very chameleon kind of role as a therapist because I know the power of meeting someone where they're at. And I think that's a huge resource in somatics is you become so knowledgeable about the nervous system and states of activation and being able to really attune and feel. And maybe I have a bit more capacity there because I'm also a traumatized person who has hypersensitivity and, you know, the alphabet soup of being neurodivergent. So there's a lot going for me. But like there's a language and there's tools that I can really put language to what I'm feeling.
So those are great tools when you're facing a moment of challenge. You were talking about whether you got to hug a friend or you got to touch your own body, ground yourself, calm your system, take some deep breaths, move out of time, whatever the practice is. Then alongside those emergency practices, there's been a much longer and slower process for you of changing patterns and breaking down patterns of different kinds, which largely get to you in my feeling, and I would love your take on this, working with fear.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the nature of PTSD in general, complex or otherwise, it's about your fear response. You were afraid in a situation or something scary was happening and your body reacted to it.
Yeah.
And those imprints are then left on you. What are some of the things that you've done through this long process to work with some of those underlying patterns or to release some of those old experiences? It's a big question.
It's a big question.
Yeah, we can break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
One chunk at a time.
Yeah, a piece of the pie at a time. I mean, I'm probably a broken record at this point, but finding a therapist that you can actually trust, a therapist that you don't feel like you have to take care of either. Someone who can just hold that space for you to totally break down, to say all the things that you've dared never say to another person, and kind of just getting it out. You have to experience it out, and you got to be witnessed in it. Because I have spent, here's a little spicy time. I've spent so many freaking years crying and screaming in my bed by myself, doing the stuff I do with my therapist by myself, but it's not therapeutic. because I'm in it alone. And it just further like intensifies the old patterns.
Yeah.
So just being watched without judgment from someone was massive for me. And being able to be as like loud and cry and, you know, I mean, there were several times you've seen it where I come out and I'm just wet, you know,
just covered in the tears.
And you're like, oh, are you okay? I'm like,
yeah. I'm fine, okay.
It was great, you know.
Great session.
It was great.
It went so well.
Yeah. So the foundation truly is like therapy.
Sure.
But then outside of that has really been about knowing my own needs and knowing the things that I need in order to fully show up in relationship with other people, you know? And for me, that often looks like I need alone time. I need to sometimes be like, babe, I love you dearly. Can you please get the frack out of the house? Because I just can't.
It has happened.
Because I just can't be around another nervous system.
Yeah.
Because my body is so autonomic on attuning to somebody else. It doesn't even matter when you're in the next room.
Fun fact, complex PTSD mostly comes from not having your needs met in childhood.
Yeah.
If you think about it, right? Your needs were not met in childhood. And then, so what does this lead to for a lot of kids? Well, they have a choice, right? They can either be punished by their caregiver, or they can get exiled from the system, or they can not have as many needs. And so classic feature of complex PTSD is the suppression of normal needs.
Yep.
Not complicated ones, not hard ones, really normal ones. And so a major part of the healing journey for a lot of people is about accepting the presence of your needs.
And facing the terror of actually saying what you need.
Yeah, expressing them, totally.
Oh boy. And I think that's been, and to this day is still like the practice, because, you know, I feel very safe with you.
Yeah.
You know, surprise, surprise. But still, you know, mostly in context of like people outside of just like our little system we have together,
Yeah.
where I am petrified of telling people how I actually feel.
Yeah.
Or like, this doesn't work for me. I need you to interact with me this way. I still can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, because there's something so threatening about it and so terrifying that I'm still processing through just thinking about it. Like I'm not ready to act on it yet. I'm already trying to metabolize the nervous system activation that just happens with me even saying that into this microphone right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges of this is that you can have people who can be your safe resourcing person in these ways, whether it's a partner, or it's a good friend, or if it's appropriate, if it's a family member, if it's somebody out in the world, whoever, if it's your therapist, whoever it is. And we have a relationship where I basically go, okay, great. If you have a specific need, or if you need me to be a little bit of a different way about something, particularly if it's not stepping on my toes in some kind of massive way.
Yeah.
But it never is, and it's always fine. And so it's very easy for me to say yes. This next conversation is with Stephanie Foo, the author of What My Bones Know. Like Elizabeth, Stephanie has complex PTSD, and you'll hear about her experiences, the many strategies she used throughout her journey, and the core insight that relational injuries are usually, and often somewhat painfully, healed through our relationships. One of the things that I remember you talking about in the book is this feeling of intense anxiety that you described as the dread. Would you mind letting people know what that felt like or looked like in practice?
It just felt like something terrible was going to happen, or I was doing something wrong, or I wasn't good enough. If I went out and I hung out with friends, I would come home and just think, I must have said something terrible. They must not like me. If I, had a pitch turned down in a meeting, it would be like, this is the end of, they don't want me here. I'm the dumbest person on this staff. And so I think that is one of the reasons why I worked so much, is because I thought I have to prove my worth at every given moment.
Yeah, something that stood out to me throughout the book is how relational all of the problem solving ended up being for you. And one of the things you later talk about with the clinician that you worked with, Dr. Hom, is how complex PTSD is a relational injury for people. And that means that it has to be eventually healed inside of relationship, that you essentially practice relating in a healthier way to yourself and to other people. What were some of the behaviors at this point in time, if we're talking about with the dread and in the throes of the complex PTSD experience, that were just automatic for you? Maybe some of the assumptions that you were making or things that you just did that were kind of getting in the way of your ability to relate to other people?
Yeah, I think that common feelings for me and for many people with complex PTSD were just like, I am not lovable. I am not good enough. You don't think I'm smart. You don't think I'm good. And that really made it hard to trust others. Trust is a big issue in complex PTSD, and it made it hard to repair with others when there were issues in a relationship, a fight, whatever. It was sort of lash out or run away. Just, oh, all of my feelings have been validated. You did hate me after all. Goodbye forever. Which is not great for maintaining long-term relationships. Not great in a workplace. Yeah.
Totally. And just talking about long-term relationships, a major feature in the book, a major character is your husband. And early on in that relationship, were there things that the two of you were bumping into behaviorally that were just like causing a lot of challenges that you had to work with?
Early on, not so much, because I was just hiding everything about who I was.
Lived that life.
Just being like, I am totally sane. Just look at how sane I am. And then going home and being like, ah! So, yeah. But, eventually the crazy came out and I couldn't hide it forever. And I had to tell him, all of my issues. And he was very accepting and remains very accepting. And there's, of course, still issues. There was issues then, there are issues now. But, we try to repair them. We always try to repair them.
Was like the presence of one person who was really open to supporting you and accepting you for who you were, a key part of this whole thing? You talk a lot in the book about just like the value of having the strong friend group that you had and how helpful that was for you.
Yeah, I think it's not just him. It is my friend group and him. They have really kept me grounded, and it's really important. They don't love me for my success or my output or how much I make or anything like that. It's very interesting how completely uninterested in anything I do my husband is professionally. They love me for who I am, and they make that very clear. And having a couple of my best friends I've had since I was 9, and I've messed up with them so many times at this point, and they keep coming back and supporting me. Having these relationships is really grounding and allows me to think, okay, maybe I'm not the worst person in the world. If I've been able to keep my best friend since I was 9, maybe I'm not the worst person in the world. If I'm able to have this person who sees me at my absolute worst and still tells me he loves me, maybe it's okay to make mistakes. Maybe that's human.
Well, I really love that for starters, in part because it's been very similar to my journey with Elizabeth and our kind of adventures together, where I think that a big thing for her was the first time that she just had a full, I don't even know the right way to put it, like a full episode, I guess, like a full emotional collapse around it. And having the experience of another person not freaking out at her or walking away from her, but just being able to be with her was very, very reparative for her. Because just inherently, if you're somebody who has that kind of a traumatic history, you haven't really had a lot of experiences of that most of the time. So it's new, it's foreign. And it's kind of this like beautiful interpersonal teaching moment where like we can be in this together.
Yeah, totally. Like me and him had an episode yesterday where, but like I think before in previous relationships and with him, sometimes when I get triggered, I can really shut down, wall off, push away, get very angry, dissociate, and instead, like I think it's helpful. Yesterday I was able to verbalize like this is what I'm really afraid of. I'm really afraid of you judging me. I'm really afraid of you, not accepting me for who I am, and being able to say those things is really difficult. And I was like crying the whole time, but it's also very reparative because the other person is able to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be here for you. And then you're able to feel safer and make that repair feel held.
Something that you talk about a little bit later in the book, and Dr. Ham was your psychologist, your therapist, the person that you worked with for an extended period of time. And your work with him is super, super interesting. And one of the things that he emphasized that also I've seen in other people's writing around this kind of material is that people who have a trauma history have often been taught the importance of emotional regulation. Regulate yourself, regulate yourself, regulate yourself. Like, don't have the collapse. If you have the collapse, it's your job to deal with it and just figure out how to come to a stable place inside of yourself, whatever that means for a person. But alongside that, what gets lost is this important of like the importance of reconnection with other people, of like connection alongside of it, the relationality of it. And I thought that was just such a cool part of the book and such a personally useful part of it for me. It was like a real light bulb moment.
Yeah. I mean, vulnerability is really important. Sometimes you need to collapse with people. Sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
I feel like I am not really close to someone unless I've like cried with them. Both of us crying together.
Some good mutual crying. Absolutely. Yeah.
Having a very full range of emotions is not always a bad thing and shouldn't always be pathologized.
I'd love to ask you about some of the things that you did during this process and what was like actually really helpful for you. Because I know that there are people who are going to be listening to this who, have their own things that they would like to work on. And particularly, you did the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle. You talk about EMDR and IFS and all of your work with Dr. Hum and just like the whole thing. Throughout that process, were there a few moments that were like white light moments for you where you just went, oh, and had a moment of insight that really changed things?
Yeah, there were a lot. I think the first one, the most important one, I don't want to say that. It's not the most important one. Sort of the most important first step was learning some bodily regulation. And so being able to do some restorative yoga and sort of recognizing what exactly it feels like to be in your body and not be dissociated from your body, and to recognize like the pleasure of sensorily being at peace, and the pleasure that comes with like deep breathing was really key, because I think the first step when you get triggered is try and just get your body a little bit regulated so that you can slow down your thoughts. And restorative yoga was the first thing that sort of broke that open for me. And restorative yoga is not vigorous yoga. It's very relaxing, and they cover you in blankets, and it's very nice. So I think that was very helpful. I think that one of the second big aha moments was then battling my dissociation, sort of trying to figure out. When I was first diagnosed, everything sort of just felt bad all the time, and I didn't know why. And I had to figure out, why do I feel bad about this thing today? What is this trigger? And there was a lot that I did with that. I like got a Fitbit that I was paying attention to my heart rate all the time. I was like exercising a lot and eating differently. And, but I think one of the really helpful things was EMDR, which at least sort of made me less dissociated about my past, because it allows you to sort of be in a moment of trauma and see it with sort of objective clarity and without all of the layers of dissociation and guilt and justification and everything, and sort of being able to live in my trauma and see how brutal it was really helpful to understand, like, no, it makes sense that this has a daily impact on my life. And I wouldn't say that any of these things is like a cure-all. I would say it's like a step-by-step thing. I needed everything, you know? And then one of the big last steps was the relational aspect, just sort of learning with Dr. Hom how my trauma manifests. We did Google Docs therapy where recorded all of our sessions and then transcribed them, put them into Google Docs, and then went and did a really close reading of every single one of our conversations and tried to figure out what exactly was happening in those conversations, and was really able to see myself dissociate, to see myself not listen, to see myself self-loathe, and understand how better to be in conversation and be present with another human being. Because, I think a lot of people think, oh, you go off into a mountaintop and you meditate and that's how you heal from trauma. And like, it does feel when you're on that mountaintop, like everything is good because because nobody's talking to you. And as soon as you get in relationship again, you're going to get triggered again.
Totally. I was listening to an Instagram live you did with Dr. Hom, actually, and he had a line that I thought was just a perfect summary of this whole thing. It's not about knowing certain things. It's about experiencing life in a different way with another person, which really just encapsulated a lot of that relational aspect, I think.
Yeah, because I think, that's so true. We don't really learn how to be by memorizing facts. We learn how to be by living.
Yeah, and you come across as, or at least come across to me, I should say, because that's my own content, right? As like a pretty top-down, logical, rational, get things done kind of person. If you think about like Google Docs therapy as an approach, that's a pretty rigorous top-down approach, right? You're really doing the close reading, you're editing in the margins, you're doing the producer thing, right? And at the same time, what you flagged as like, oh, this first thing that got you into relationship with your content in a way, or that really opened the door, was this restorative yoga practice, which is such a body-based, like bottom-up kind of way into it. And I just think that marriage of the two is really interesting.
Yeah, all three of those, I would say, were not things that my rational brain thought would work. Like, I didn't think that your restorative yoga would function in that way. I didn't really believe in EMDR. It's a very woo-woo, crazy sort of idea that you like, whatever, you watch a hand going back and forth or you listen to beeps and then you're going to be able to like be a child again. But I do think that like integrating the subconscious and the body and experiencing these things is integral to the healing, because so much of the trigger, so much of what's going on is not rational. It's very visceral and autonomic.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that, and like I'm a pretty rationalist, top-down, cognitive kind of person. That's very much my lane and my brand. And as I've learned more about the personal growth world and the mental health world, I think I've relaxed some of that, because there are just these things that we don't really know how they work exactly, to be honest. And we're not sure why some people are benefited and some people aren't. But for some populations of people with something like EMDR, it's just radically helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I used to poo-poo things like energy healing, but I have friends who are like, this helps me get through my week. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know. There's things I don't know. If it helps you calm your body, then do it.
Totally. And, using that as an example, there's a relational aspect to it at the very least, right? There's like another person who's standing there next to you. Maybe
Caring
there's
for
some
you.
gentle touch going on. Yeah, totally. And like that, I think that exchange of caring is such a huge part of, like, set aside whatever else might be going on, but like just that aspect of it alone could totally be enough for a person to reconnect with themselves or feel safe with other people.
I think a lot of people think, oh, if you really want other people to love you, you have to love yourself. I don't think that's true. Like, you have to have other people love you in order to love yourself. That's how it works.
Yeah. Totally.
Because we're community-oriented creatures. We live in tribe. Like that, you can't just be in a room in total isolation thinking I'm the best with no outside feedback. So I think really trying to find ways to have relationships, to nourish them, to appreciate them, to be grateful in them, to enjoy them, was really key.
Yeah. One of the things that is a huge part of any relationship is the ability to deal with things when they go sideways, right? Because like everything's all great when everybody wants the same thing and everyone's on the same page, but that's not life. That's not the way it works. And for me, there's just a 2-page little section in the book that gets to what I think that Dr. Hom called like two-way repair, something like that, versus one-directional repair. That for me just like totally blew my mind. It was such a great articulation of this. And I was wondering if you could share that, because I think it would be really helpful for people.
Yeah, I think that when you grow up having complex PTSD, you think that repair is either you demand apology or you apologize and prostrate yourself on the floor and cry and say, like, please forgive me. And that's it. And usually conflict is not that simple. Usually both people have misread each other in some way. And you sort of need to state your needs as well as give people what they need. And so I think, having empathy for where somebody is at is really critical. Asking like, hey, can you change your behavior, meet this boundary, whatever. And also being like, what can I do to help you meet that boundary? Is there something you need from me? I mean, like, I have ghosted so many fewer people since in the past couple of years. It's more, I've asked for more, I have confronted people more, and been more open to people confronting me. It's really hard when people confront me and ask me to change still. But I think, again, before I would just run away and be like, you don't love me anymore. And now I have that instinct, and then I have to tell myself, okay, no, they're asking for something from you, show up.
Was that when you first started bumping into that content or trying to do that in a different sort of way? I have to imagine that it was pretty scary. I don't know if that's true or not. You tell me. But how did you start to like dip your toe into that pool? And was it hard? Because I just think that this is such a huge thing for so many people.
I think it was hard, but it was made easier Dr. Hom was like really, really like guiding me through it, or like holding my hand. Because first it was, well, the easiest way to do it was with him, because he was so responsive to that, and he was really like, we're forceful about like how let's make the two-way repair. And because he was modeling it really well for me. Because we would see all of these little breaks in the Google Doc, ones that I wasn't even attuned to. I didn't think were a big deal. And he would be like, no, you weren't listening to me here. Look at this. Or, like, you changed the subject on me. You disappeared. Or here I'm talking to you in like a really passive aggressive way. And it was on paper, it was really easy because I was used to being edited on paper on a Google Doc. That was like the one way I was used to receiving lots and lots of criticism. on paper, I was like, okay, I understand. I'll change that or whatever. And then the tricky thing is like taking it off the page and making it real life.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving it into the real world. Totally.
Yeah. But that was a really helpful first step.
And I just want to flag that you found a way that worked for you. Like this context of it being on the page in an editorial context where you are comfortable receiving feedback. You're like, yeah, I've done this. I am good at this. I can handle this, was probably really helpful. And I just want to flag to people, like, that might not be your process. You might not be that person, but hey, there's probably some version of that out there that's going to work for you, or that maybe you would find a little bit more approachable. Yeah.
Absolutely. I had to make my own therapy that eventually that would work for me in this way.
Yeah.
But like, maybe there's some way in which you love receiving feedback. Like maybe somebody has to be holding you when you receive the feedback. Totally. Like I literally asked for that the other day. I was like, can you like hug me while you tell me what you need me to change? And maybe that's what you need. Maybe it could go a million different ways. But I think sometimes it is like, it's messed up, actually. It's deeply messed up that we have a system that exists this way, that we have to fight for our own healing in this way, where you have to get creative, where I've had to get creative because there should be enough resources. And culturally competent resources, especially to help people who aren't psychologically literate, who are first-generation immigrants, who are coming from backgrounds where therapy is not accepted. So there should be healing practices that like incorporate traditional practices, because maybe the comfort place for you is in the temple.
Yeah, that's a way in. Totally.
Maybe the comfort place for you is like with all your Santeria stuff set up, but like we're not going to get to that place unless the mental health industry and therapists are a lot more creative and progressive, which right now they're not.
Next up is my conversation with Dr. Jacob Hom, an expert on complex PTSD, who is also the therapist who worked with Stephanie Foo. It's one of my favorite conversations we've had on the podcast. Dr. Hom has a very unique way and a very unique perspective on the limitations of intellectualizing and the various ways that we've gotten kind of overly technical and prescriptive about the recovery process. He took our conversation to a really interesting place, and I think you'll like it. So you're already highlighting that there are different ways that, of course, like there are, an infinite number of difficult experiences that a person could have in the course of their life. And there are different ways that trauma can show up for people. You mentioned intergenerational trauma, the ways in which we kind of hand these things down over time. And so I'm wondering how you kind of conceptualize those differences and how the differences between them can show up for people in terms of their experience.
I don't conceptualize.
Okay.
I don't like that.
What do you mean by that?
I'm sorry.
Great.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The way I work is that I look at what happens now, how you enter my room, and then I work out from there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we might weave a narrative that has to do with intergenerational trauma or contextual trauma, but that process of meaning making it's part of it's an exercise. It's not the goal and it's not the truth. Sorry, I know that sounds very vague.
No, I think this is really interesting.
I'm trying to get at, how do we get away from a conversation that's going to get us stuck in ideas and in our head into a true felt sense of what we're dealing with and how to be present for what it is that people suffer. And if we are going to use the head for that, then I use the head for understanding what's happening in the moment with a person. How do they come into the room? Like, you have such a wide range of presumptions or states or ways of entering a room or entering a relationship. And since I'm a therapist, I'm the constant. And then I see like hundreds of people. And so I have this huge like collection of possible ways. And I try to make sense of the patterns of the way people show up, both when they walk into the room, but then when they're activated when they're vulnerable, when they're hurt. All these notions of rupture is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
How they leave
rupture, repair. Yeah.
Yeah. How they leave moments of connection. And that's what I'm obsessed with. So all this other stuff, which is really important and true, the contextual, the intergenerational, I only care about how it shows up with my patient in front of me in the moment that I'm with them and how it impacts me.
Yeah, well, then just to ask you about this, doctor. I'm not a clinician. I'm just somebody who talks to people like this about this kind of stuff, and I've tried to become educated about it. But I don't have that kind of experience really sitting with somebody doing that work in a deep way. And my limited experience around it is that it can be helpful for people sometimes to be able to kind of have a box to put their experiences into, or a framework to sort of, conceptualize what's happened to them. Like you were talking about at the beginning, it was helpful for me to understand that these things were coming from pain, and it wasn't that I had this label of borderline or whatever. And so that kind of like a conceptualizing process, I think can be useful, but I'm just wondering how that shows up more like in practice.
Exactly. So what would happen is that I look for it to show up first. And then you have to combat all kinds of shame and self-consciousness. And that's where maybe the explanations of putting things in a box is an important first step in kind of bracketing shame and self-consciousness. But you're right that sometimes knowing and understanding trauma processes can also help us have more tender, compassionate understanding of why we act the way we do. So it is true that your question, there can be a really valuable outcome to understanding all of these factors. The dilemma that I have, or my counterpoint, is that if we talk about those first, they become reified, they become static, they become a false idol or a place to stop and think you're done, or it's not actually, it's just the first step. If I get it wrong, people will feel misunderstood. If I get it right, they'll feel deeply understood. But both of those are false way stations along this process of self-discovery. And so I'm still hesitant to even go there still, because I don't want to shortchange the person's own experience of self-discovery.
Is that how you think about this process in general? Like working with past painful experiences, call it, trauma or complex trauma, whatever like the word is that you want to attach to it, the difficult things that we go through. Do you think of it as a process of self-discovery?
Yeah, it's all process. That part is true. The part I'm hesitating on is whether it's just self-discovery.
I'm sure there's a lot else in there.
Yes. There's like understanding human nature in general, understanding your parents, understanding other people. And the worry about the word self-discovery is that it also feels like it's trying to get to a truth, whereas I'm still focused on just opening up a process. Like my ideal outcome for therapy is that a person leaves with some useful framework for understanding human function, other people, but they have a tolerance for complexity and ambiguity, and a capacity to like see the best in people, give people the benefit of the doubt, have grace for themselves. So it's all process stuff, not something discovered, but to be in a state of constant discovery, maybe. I don't know. That sounds really hokey.
Well, it can both sound a little hokey and be really true. And I don't know. What do you do to let that kind of a thing go? Because, man, I would have a hard time letting that one go.
This is the problem. As soon as you ask, what do you do? You're already in your head.
Okay.
Then you're out of the process.
Maybe a better way to ask it then is like, are there processes that you use? Are there tools you rely on?
No, none.
No? Yeah, none.
I've tried. In the face of it, nothing works. It's all BS. Self-care is BS. Exercise is BS. Nothing works.
What do you mean?
I've tried it all. Like in the face of overwhelming grief, there's nothing to do except be doubled over in pain. and to just sob until it just like comes out of you. And then it comes back in, and like the cup fills up again. And then you have to cry it out again. And you have to be held while it's happening. There is a process to it. It's not a how-to. It's just like a surrender to, while also feeling loved, being held, being witnessed. That's the hard part. The rituals of past societies have baked in the wisdom of this process, and we're without rituals nowadays. And so then we're looking for self-help solutions when we just need rituals that are shared by community. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Would you mind giving an example of what you're referring to?
About a ritual?
Yeah. Like what could that look like?
It's as simple as just like losing it, as like being of having your ugly cry on, of being drenched with sweat and tears and snot, while someone's there to breathe for you while you can't breathe. It's hard. I don't necessarily accomplish that in therapy. We get to approximations of it, but there's still some release if done well. Like I'm not somatic, like in the true sense, like your partner's being trained in, but I make sure that the body keeps up with us, that the body is also harmonizing to the story that's being told, and that it's contributing to the song of it. And then there's nothing to be done. There are some times whenever like my patients will share something and I'm like, there's nothing for me to do. You did that just right. And they're like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so weird? And why don't you tell me something useful? I'm like, you did it. I will experience it sometimes, but other times it's just like, I honor it as it's being told.
For people who have gone through traumatic experiences of different kinds, complex or otherwise, is there a stifling of what you're describing? That poignance, that authenticity, whatever?
Good Lord, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, trauma basically just puts you in a box, compartmentalizes you. You become a fixer, a pleaser, whatever those archetypes are that people talk about. You lose connection with what you really feel. You dissociate, you numb out, or you just become dysregulated, or you're lost in old patterns of reenactments. So the whole process of therapy with me, at least, is I try to help you see when you're like kind of in the weeds of trauma reactivity, and try to convince you that it's safe to like not be in that with me, at least just with me for now. And then you can go back into that very comfortable, cozy, protective trauma response if you need to. But to practice going in and out of like love and fear, presence and I don't know, compartmentalization.
So it's kind of the word I've heard Peter Levine use is pendulating. There's a movement in and out of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say that word, but I didn't want to
drop the lingo. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of the things that I've just really heard you talk about that I found very resonant in my experience is how you work with anger and the ways in which you seem to support people in feeling very rightfully, comfortable with the anger associated with the experiences that we've had, as often something that we can kind of try to regulate out of people or push down.
You're right. I'm hesitant because my relationship to anger is morphing. I'm learning more about it.
Okay, yeah. I'd love to hear about that.
Originally, my proposal was that anger, we do a disservice to anger as a society because we universally think it's a bad thing. But if we are being true to the idea that our body is just giving us another useful signal, then anger is often the energy that is saying that something is not right, something bad is happening, and I want you to protest this. I want you to fight this. And I'm going to give you the energy to fight off this thing that's causing harm or doing something bad to you. In that sense, we have to heed the wisdom that is, or the perception and the wisdom that anger is affording us of what's happening in the environment or in the relationship. That's the way that it can be useful, and especially for trauma. A lot of patients have that natural angry reaction to being abused, but in fear, they're not allowed to experience it. And so reclaiming the capacity to be angry is an incredibly important step for a lot of people. It's saying you did not deserve this. This was not right. What happened to you was not right. So it's reclaiming self-worth in a way through anger, in a visceral way. Your body is saying, this is not right. You deserve better. And then there's anger is, again, a very, very dangerous experience because it can take over the body and it can cause us to lose our humanity or lose the humanity of the other person. It can be part of the fear response and cause us to create tribalism and violence, obviously. So it has to be tempered. We have to honor what it's trying to teach us, but still decide very thoughtfully what we do with the energy that it provides us. We still have to stay in control. And then the other thing that I'm personally working on is the anger that just comes out of being dysregulated and tired and hangry. Because I have a young child, and I was like losing my patience with him because we both had COVID, and I couldn't nap because the COVID wasn't as bad for him. But he and I were quarantining together, and so I had to be with him for 14 hours a day, and my poor brain couldn't do it. If you've ever read Sapolsky's book, Behave, he does such a great job of talking about how the prefrontal cortex is such a fragile part of our brain that takes up 30% of our calories and has limited resource and limited willpower. And then anger just takes over. And so I did this practice of forgiving myself for being angry, knowing that I was COVID compromised, and naming it for my son, that I've been very grumpy, and apologizing to him and letting him be mad at me for how I treated him. So we have both the dysregulated anger and the just anger. I allow him space to tell me how wrong it was, the way I treated him. So finishing letting his anger find release, serve its function. And then sitting in the humility of how imperfect and human I am in that process. That's my most recent thinking about anger.
I love that. I mean, there are some things that we're still figuring out how to talk about in the mental health, self-helpy world generally. And I think that anger is like toward the top of that particular list, where it's just really hard to talk about it because there's so much yes and in it that you're kind of speaking to and what you're describing here. How, like, yes, reclaiming the aspects of it where they're powerful and motivating and moving. And one of the things that Elizabeth's mentioned to me is that, I would rather work with somebody who's angry, who's pissed off, than somebody who is more sad and depressive, because there's more motion to the emotion. You can move it somewhere. It creates an energy in the room that can be used. And at the same time, exactly what you're describing, it's maybe our most destructive emotion. It leads to a lot of problematic behavior out in the world. I mean, individually in our lives and much broader than that. Yeah, something that I want to find a way to ask about here is the masking process that can happen around a lot of this stuff. I think particularly for people who've gone through really hard things in life, there's often the construction of this exterior that protects those vulnerable bits that we've been talking about throughout. And how, as a therapist, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that part of your job is seeing what's underneath it and helping the person kind of look underneath it over time and become more comfortable with that, and it being, less of a painful process. But that's an incredibly hard thing to do.
It's the first step. I think the IFS is correct, that the first step is that you actually spend a lot of time with the protectors. You honor them. Yeah. You're like, what a clever boy you are for being so smart, for being able to come up with these strategies to survive and to not, how could you have kept all of those emotions inside you for so many years? That's incredible. You have such a capacity to suffer. It's amazing. And look at you, like willing to fight back and snap back at someone who's like trying to hurt you. Good job. Like,
yeah, totally.
So you honor them, you give them gratitude. You say, the other thing that I love is that they're like your most loyal dogs, pets. You say, I love you. I need you to be with me. I don't want you to, I'm not trying to kick you out of here. I just need you to stand next to me, not in front of me. Let me face reality, but you keep my back, protect me when I need it, but don't take over. And then, so after you do that bit of work, the lessen the pain of seeing the exiles or the hurt inner children or whatever it is. So I kind of wanted to not say lessen the pain. I wanted to say be surrender to the pain of it, to accept that it's going to be a brutal, painful experience, but know that it doesn't last forever. Know that the more, I have this visual of like, when you allow your heart to be shattered, it actually makes it bigger and more flexible. And it can contain more of life's experiences and more love and joy as well. And so you surrender to the whole death of the death experience of severe pain, knowing that you'll be reincarnated into a greater capacity for living the next moment.
To go to some of the Buddhist philosophy with it, you're relaxing craving a little bit or clinging.
Exactly. That's why I don't like how questions. It comes from striving and clinging and all that other active energy. Whereas when you said this is changing my state of mind, I think because we're relaxing into presence, not passive in a helpless sense, but just like a relaxed, wondering, leaned back sense instead of sitting forward.
Now we're moving on to a conversation with Dr. Peter Levine. He's the author of Waking the Tiger and the developer of Somatic Experiencing. Dr. Levine is an expert on the relationship between trauma and the body, and in this excerpt, he focuses on how trauma can almost get stuck in our bodies and some of the body-based tools that can then help us heal.
In somatic experiencing approach is we try to come into the periphery. We touch into these difficult sensations. We don't go to memories, but memories may come up. But we, again, work to see where the body has become stuck and how we can help move it through in time.
May I just sort of say back to you some headlines that I'm hearing here? One is, so true to your work, is picking up the physicalization of trauma. I think people talk about the body speaking in its way, like your feet moving. Another key element is what you call, I believe, pendulation, where you swing like a pendulum into the material, you touch it, and then you swing back to resource yourself so you can go into it again, maybe moving back and forth, including the resourcing of that beautiful birthday memory with the trains and all of that, right? And then very interestingly, in part, as you well know, in terms of how the brain works, oftentimes trauma gets frozen and it's decontextualized.
That's right.
Particularly really early trauma before the hippocampus has become anatomically mature around the third or fourth birthday, because there's no locating in time. And you're helping it be located in time as in that was horrible and it was then. And this is now, the light is coming through the window. You're safe. You're okay. I'm with you. This is now. Really, really crucial thing. So I just wanted to say back to you, some of the huge headlines, that I'm getting from what you're saying here.
Peter, I have a question for you, but it's quite a personal question. And if you want to, skirt around it in any ways, you're more than welcome to. For many people, traumatic experiences happen to their body or are associated with their body. You just shared an example of this. Like, that's a very intimate example. Something bad happened to you physically. And then you went on to create this whole methodology of therapy that's tied to the body. There's something in that really, I don't know. There's really something there for starters.
Yeah.
And for many people, when they go through these kinds of experiences, they understandably have an enormous amount of pain, shame, judgment, discomfort associated with their physical form. Right. And so you're using all of these somatic, body-driven tools to help people access feeling better, but the body's a painful place to be.
That's right.
And that seems like this really core tension
delicate.
Inside a lot of the work that you do. And I'm just wondering how you help people work through that, how maybe you worked through that in some ways in your own life, wherever you want to take that.
Let me just start with the archetype of Chiron from the Greek mythology, the wounded healer, that we all have to heal our own wounds, at least adequately, before we can be present with others. And being present with others is essential. You know, in one of my books, in an unspoken voice, I write that trauma is not so much or not just what happened to us, but it's rather what we hold inside in the absence of that empathetic, that present empathetic other. And I think that's really critical, to have that witness there who's basically by their presence is saying that I'm here for you, and I'll stay here. So that's essential. And working with pain and shame, you know, very often trauma comes not in the form of, you know, of flashbacks, the traditional models of trauma, but as physical symptoms, as pain, and as corrosive emotions such as shame. And shame really strangulates the self, strangulates the spirit, and holds it hostage. And so working with shame is an important component in working with trauma. When we are feeling shame, our bodies do a very specific posture. So we look away and down because we want to avert anybody's eye contact. So we look away and down, and then our body collapses. That just robs the vital energy, and we collapse like this. And so we stay in this embodied state, this physiological shame state, and it seems like it's going to be impossible to do anything to get out of it. But one of the things I discovered, and my guide worked with this with me, is that when we move into that shame, just the smallest amount, and then come back out, and then just sense what's going on in our body. A lot of times there could be tingling, vibration, inner movements, things like that. And then just letting that settle, letting that go to equilibrium, to balance. And then again, going into that movement just a little bit more this time, just touching into it. Often images come up from where the shame came from, and then slowly coming back up. And what I've noticed when you come back up from that, the chest, I'm doing this as an exercise, my chest is expanding. I feel something that's akin to pride and even dignity. So again, as we find somatic ways to, because it's the imprint that this has on the body. As I think about it, most of the people that, when I don't see people privately anymore, but when I did for years, many of them, I would say most of them, presented with pain and shame, and that the way that both of that just robbed our vitality. So again, how to work with that in a relatively safe way, and just to be supported in doing that.
What basically blew my mind when I first learned about your approach was its fundamental view that we are innately healthy. And what trauma does is it blocks innately healthy expressions, such as fleeing or fighting back or using your feet, let's say, in your own personal memory to get away. So one of the really very powerful things you do when you work with people is to enact in various ways, creatively and safely, a kind of a completion of the arc of coping to challenge that was thwarted as people were defeated, entrapped, and then locked in as a result.
Yes.
And I think that's really quite fascinating, how you help people complete that arc, like the release of shame and the physical arc that's involved in that, with the idea that simply unlocking, unleashing, the tiger within, that can really complete that arc, that itself is profoundly healing.
Yeah.
And I find that both brilliant and really, really hopeful.
In a way, we go back to where the person got thwarted in their basic survival instincts or survival motor patterns, where it got stuck, and then help the person lead it towards completion. Because when we complete an act, then that becomes beautiful. I know it might seem a little bit strange, but that's been my experience. In the completion itself, we find the roots of freedom. As far as I know, the only way to do that is with the body, because again, that's where it got stuck. And that's where those movements, like you alluded when I was working with my guide, seeing my feet moving as though I were fleeing. And I couldn't flee then because I was overwhelmed. I was tackled. I was injured. So again, being able to complete that and to defang it is a critical element of good, sound trauma therapy.
I'm reflecting on major takeaways for people working with this material on their own. As Forrest said, which will be most of the population, most of the time. When I sort of reflect on this for myself and for people in general, I just want to share some of the headline takeaways that stand out for me. One is that your history matters. It's real. It happened. It's designed to affect you. You were affected by it in the ways that you were. There's an honesty and there's even a dignity in facing your own history. Second, you can't change what happened, but you can heal its effects on you today. Yes. It's lingering effects in your body, your emotions, how you approach things, including effects you're unaware of, as even exemplified by the recovery of a real memory of being assaulted.
Yes, that really happened, to be able to say that to oneself.
Yeah, it really did happen, and it really does happen. So there's a lot of hope here. Okay, so how to do it, right? So what are some of the keys? An awareness of the traces in the body, really instructive. And the body is often trying to tell you something. And the traces in the body and also elsewhere often indicate where your original natural healthy coping response was thwarted and frozen and incomplete. And so recovering that and getting in touch with it safely, swinging into it to touch it, then swinging away to resource yourself, swinging into it to become more and more aware, and then finding ways to complete that arc.
That's right.
Of healthy coping so your body can experience a completion around that trauma. It's just really, really powerful.
And it takes patience. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it takes patience. Thank you for jumping into my recap of your greatest hits here.
And also finding the correct teacher. Because it's important who we tell our stories to. They have to be a person of high integrity and capacity to be present for sure.
Including yourself.
Yes,
when you tell yourself the story, to be careful about reshaming yourself about it and dismissing it and, internalizing as we do what others have done to you, but still try not to do it to yourself. And of course, be careful with not telling your story to people who dismiss it or deny it
Well, that happened a long time ago.
Yeah, not that. And then in all that, as Forrest was pointing out, the power and the importance of creating your own context of safety for yourself in your journey, right? Including if you do work with people who are less than perfect. I think there's a wide range of therapists, and a wide range of friends and parents and and others helping yourself get the most you can from people who are not perfect.
Yeah. I like that. Let me just add one other thing. I know we're coming to
Please.
the end. The last chapter in my book is titled "Living My Dying," and it's starting to come to bring in my mortality and examine that. And I did that in a number of different ways. I did do a psychedelic experience once, which again gave me more of that feeling that, yes, death is inevitable, but it's not necessarily the end of the story. I came to, in one of those sessions, reconnecting with that vital child, even though he had experienced abandonment, that he was still there as this. I really embraced him. I felt love towards him and love from him. And one of the pictures here.
Oh, that's you.
Yeah, about
that's really great.
And that's where I want to return. That's about living my dying, of really caressing that beautiful, wonderful child, hug him, hold him close to me, and just feel the tears of gratitude.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. That's really sweet, Peter. In our final conversation in this series, Rick and I talk with Dr. Gabor Maté. He's the author of The Myth of Normal. This episode revisits some of the core themes we've heard throughout this episode: the insidious nature of developmental trauma, how it leads to adaptation and repression, and the long-term physical impact it has on us in adulthood. Dr. Maté goes one step further, however, and asks us to view trauma not as an individual pathology, but as a symptom of a toxic culture.
So toxic culture, really the concept is very simple, and it's actually directly related to laboratory science. If you're growing organisms in a laboratory, in a broth, you'd call that a culture broth. That's a culture. So you're culturing organisms. Now, as we pointed out in the introduction to this book, if in that culture broth, these organisms were genetically sound, but they were not thriving, they were falling ill or dying in large numbers, you'd think there was something wrong with that culture broth. You'd call it a toxic culture. And when we look at our society, the increasing rates of mental illness, childhood suicide, kids being diagnosed left, right, and center with one so-called disorder after another, rise in addictions and addiction deaths, the rising of autoimmune illness, all the social dysfunction that we see in the United States, your country, something like 70% of adults are on one medication or another. Either we see it as an individual phenomena, which I don't, or we see it as the outcome of a broad social, cultural, economic situation. And if that's the case, then the culture that we live in, according to the product or the results that it manifests, is a toxic culture. And this is where we have to challenge the usual medical way of looking at it, of people as individuals. It's all individual organs and systems and in an isolated body. Whereas the only way to really understand human beings is, as Rick well knows, from the Buddhist perspective, is from the vision of interdependent co-arising. We are biopsychosocial creatures, to put it in medical terms. Therefore, if we're falling ill and not doing well, that's not individual predispositions or failures. There's something wrong with the culture. Hence the phrase toxic culture.
That's really a beautiful summary of a very, very big idea. And one of the things that really struck me as I was in the process of engaging with the book, engaging with the material, were the ways in which you situate almost all of it relationally. To apply my language to yours, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but that's how it felt to me. And how there's this major focus on the ways in which we put pressure on each other in ways large and small, and therefore also the ways in which the broader culture puts pressure on us.
Yes. A respected mutual acquaintance of ours, Dr. Dan Siegel, talks about what he calls interpersonal neurobiology, that our brains and the function of our nervous systems are not isolated phenomena, but they're related to our relationships, and that we affect each other's nervous systems. And the brain itself is a social construct, a social product from its development beginning in the womb, and is forever affected by our relationships. Now, Dan being a psychiatrist, he was focusing on the brain and the mind. Me being a general physician, I'm interested in the whole body. And I'm simply taking his concept of interpersonal neurobiology, which scientifically is the only legitimate way of understanding it, and applying it to our biology in general. So I talk about interpersonal biology. And I'm saying that our physiology from conception onwards and throughout our lifetime is affected by our relationships and is modulated by our relationships. And so that a lot of the pathology that we diagnose as individual pathology, in fact, represents our relationships from the earliest days of our life in the womb to our deaths. It reflects our relationships and how other people act on us and how we act on other people and how we co-create each other's physiology. And now there's nothing new about that concept. The Buddha said as much 2,500 years ago. And there was a good reason why Nietzsche called Buddha the greatest of physiologists, because the Buddha really got not just the mind, but the physiology. But traditional medicinal practices have understood this interactive unity forever. Western science, for its brilliance, has created cleavages where in life there aren't any. So all we're doing is restoring a concept that is age-old, but we're doing so in the context of Western science, because we have the science now to prove all that human intuition has always said. My problem with the medical profession, or I don't mean individuals in it, but I mean as an institution, is that it doesn't even follow modern science. So in separating the mind and the body and the individual from the environment, and without regarding the social environment, modern medicine actually is unscientific in its practice. So there's certain human needs of the child, such as unconditional security, secure attachment with the parents, not having to work to make that relationship work, not having to be good, not having to be fast, not having to be smart, not having to be compliant. Just being is good enough. So the child doesn't have to work to make that relationship function. The capacity to feel all our emotions, our anger, our grief, our joy, everything. Which incidentally is what Buddhist practice is all about. It's about not about suppressing any particular feeling or emotion, but to observe it, but to allowing it at the same time. And number 4, free play out there in nature. That's the 4th need of the child. Now, in terms of adults, we also have needs. Needs for belonging, needs for connection, need for meaning, a need for transcendence, a need for competence, a need for mastery, a need for authenticity, autonomy. These are essential human needs that evolution has prepared us for. So how you gauge the society then is, to what degree does it meet the needs of human beings as evolution has prepared them? Now, when it comes to the needs of children, we trample all over them in ways we can talk about. And when it comes to connection and meaning, authenticity and mastery and the sense of agency in one's life, well, it tramples on those needs as well of adults. And that's what makes the culture toxic, is that it does not meet the needs of human beings. It meets some needs in a physical sense, even that in a very unequal and unfair manner, but it does to some degree. But the emotional, psychological, spiritual needs that are just as much a part of us, if anything, it tramples all over them.
One of the things that I've heard you say in the past, Gabor, is that our personality is an adaptation, that it's essentially a bundle of genuine traits which are true to us on some level,
Yes.
and conditioned coping responses that arise out of interaction with our environment.
Yeah.
Which points to what you're saying. If the environment is problematic behaviors will arise out of it. So what are some of the the conditioned responses that you think are more problematic in people's behavior maybe for them that are coming out of this toxic culture?
Well, so children have certain needs. One is for attention, just for who they are, just attention. That's a need of the child. That's as much of a need of the child as food and water. I'm talking about a developmental need, a need for healthy development. Now, that's the need of the child. And attention from adults, unconditional attention from adults, actually helps to promote the growth of the brain in healthy ways. It's essential for essential brain circuits. A child that doesn't get the attention that they need, they will be consumed by attracting attention. No, they want to be attractive. And hence the $50 billion cosmetic surgery industry. People are just desperate to be attractive. Why? Because they didn't get their needs met. A child who wasn't made to feel important just for their existence, which again is a developmental need. You really need to matter to your parents. Not because you did this or that, but just because you exist. Now, if you don't get that sense that you're important just for who you are, you become a compulsive helper. And now you spend your life, how can I help other people so that I'll be important? And, I know that one. It's part of what drove me. It's part of what drove me into medical school and drove a lot of my career as a physician, is that need to be important. It's not only that I wanted to help people, I did, but I had a personal need to be important. And to that degree, it becomes addictive. A person who wasn't liked for who they are will become very nice. And if I become very nice, I'll suppress my healthy anger because I'll be afraid that if I'm angry, I won't be liked. And then what's going to happen is a lot of people will come to your funeral and say how nice you were. Too bad you died so young. Because that suppression of healthy anger actually promotes illness in ways that we can talk about. If you weren't loved for who you were, you might become very charming. So you have this charming personality. And how many of these desperately charming personalities have we seen in public life, in entertainment or private life or in politics? So these personality traits, they're not who you are. They are substitutes masquerading as you. But they're substitutes that you adopted because you needed to be accepted and loved. And if you weren't loved, accepted for who you were, you will develop these traits, not deliberately, not as a manipulative strategy, but as an automatic response. And then you think, I'm my personality. I'm this way and I'm that way. No, you're not.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You're not that way at all. You've become that way. It's become your second nature. And think of that phrase, second nature. What does that imply? Let's go back, if you permit me, to what you said about your childhood.
Yeah.
I would argue that the problem isn't that you were shy or isolated. Here's the question I would ask you. When you felt in pain about that, when you felt sad and lonely, who did you speak to?
No one.
Now, you've got a son here. Ideally, if he's 5 years old or 7 years old and he's sad and lonely, who would you want him to talk to?
Me, his mom.
Right.
Or some other wise person. Yeah.
And if Forrest felt as a 5-year-old sad and lonely, and he didn't come to you and talk to you about it, or his mom, how would you interpret that? How would you explain it?
I and or his mom were not available, or we pushed him away, or through our own modeling, we sent messages that this is something to handle inside yourself, if at all.
How does that feel to a 5-year-old?
Lonely. If that were what the 5-year-old were feeling, lonely, and also a kind of internal division, as if, this pain is not allowed. It's not good. There must be something wrong with me. Everybody else around me looks like they have a happy, smiley face. They all seem fine. Ooh, I must be damaged in some way.
When we're repressing our healthy anger, we're also messing with our immune system. What I'm saying is that the repression of healthy anger, being really nice, is actually, first of all, adaptive trait. that we developed in childhood becomes part of our personality. We think that's who we are. And at the same time, it's a hazard to our immune system and to our physiological health.
Mm.
So this is how the mind-body unity is just unshakably unified. On the other hand, if I just, the unhealthy rage, it triggers the sympathetic nervous system, it narrows your arteries, elevates your blood pressure, increases clotting factors, makes you more prone for heart disease and strokes and high blood pressure. So on the one hand, you have the repression of healthy anger. It leads to all kinds of illnesses, or at least contributes to the onset of these illnesses. Then you have the unhealthy rage that also is physiologically unhealthy.
In a way, you have a kind of psychological autoimmune illness. In other words, in an autoimmune illness, we have the immune system attacking some part or system in the body as alien, when in fact it's not. And in much the same way, when we divide ourselves internally, when we make that terrible choice between authenticity or attachment, as you say, and we choose attachment, which is the seemingly sensible choice, but it's the problematic one long term, right? At the time, we give up our authenticity, we divide ourselves, we exile parts of ourselves out, and then including potentially anger, and or we get angry at parts of ourselves that we exile. That's a kind of mental autoimmune illness.
Exactly. And just as that anger that you repress, it doesn't evaporate, it just turns against itself.
Yeah.
So can the immune system turn against itself. And because of the unity of these two systems. And you're talking the language now of our mutual friend, I think, Dick Schwartz, the internal family system. We're parts of ourselves. And Dick and I have great conversations about this. We're very much in unity. In fact, Dick did a study with rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease, where these parts, as you call them, that are exiled, that turns against the self, manifest in rheumatoid arthritis. And when Dick helped people come to realize all this and to relate different to themselves, their arthritis symptoms got better. And which is exactly what scientifically you would expect.
A theme that runs under your work for me is this idea of something beneath, something that is undisturbed, something that's true to a person, a feeling of wholeness, a return to core nature, however you want to talk about it. And that's really how you position healing. And so I'm wondering, what do you think supports people in that return to wholeness?
Forever we've talked about our Christ nature or our Buddha nature or our Buddha self, the Atman, versus the Brahman, these concepts of a true self have been around since we know human thought and human spiritual endeavor. What I'm saying about it is that illness, or what we call illness, very often comes along as a sign that somehow we've departed from ourselves. And so that illness itself can be a call. Not that I would wish it up on anybody, but I interviewed a lot of people whose stories demonstrate that the illness served as a wake-up call of how they had unwittingly, in response to childhood pressures when they had no choice in the matter, abandoned themselves. And the disease was a call to return to themselves. And, a teacher that I honor, A.H. Almas, talks about the essential self. Dick Schwartz, who we just mentioned, talks about the self with a capital S. It's all the same language, and that is an aspect, an underlying ground aspect of human beings that, again, this society and this culture really seduces away from, in urging and even pressuring us to find the satisfaction and the meaning outside of ourselves. And so many of the products and entertainments and activities that it fosters are designed to exploit that loss of connection to ourselves and to somehow temporarily fill in that hole, which inevitably results in a crash. So yeah, there's that part of ourselves, and I think this can sound new agey, and I hate something like that, and again, I don't wish illness on anybody, but it's almost like nature wants you to be yourself more than it wants you to survive. In other words, nature wants to be true to itself, is what I'm saying. And when we've lost connection to ourselves because of trauma, not because we've chosen it, disease often comes along. Not that I wouldn't say this to anybody who just diagnosed, hey, congratulations, your disease is here to wait. I never say that to anybody. What I'm talking about is what people themselves have discovered and have told me, which is that through dealing with the illness, they've become truly themselves for the first time in their lives that they can recall. Now, whether I'd have the courage and the wisdom to do that if it happened to me, I don't want to find out. But I'm saying is that for these people who had that experience, it was that relationship to themselves that they had transformed. That's the key factor, it seems to be.
What's the place for mourning, grieving? Somehow I'm really touched to there. Just grieving what wasn't present when we were young, what grieving a struggle we have to make every day to swim upstream in this culture that is toxic.
Yeah.
Thinking about your own childhood, Gabor, a remarkable history yourself, just the place for grieving, mourning, the price we've paid.
So, yeah, remember I talked about the neuroscientist Panksepp, and he talked about this, what he called panic grief system in the brain. So when we have loss, we have to grieve it, because grieving means that we come to terms with the loss. Now, if we refuse to grieve, or if we don't know how to grieve, that pain is just rooted in us. It never lets go. Part of my problem in life, Rick, is that I refuse to grieve. I don't know that I refused it on any kind of conscious level, but I suppose that the fear of it was, if the floodgates open, it'd be so huge that I wouldn't be able to handle it. A psychologist friend of mine, Gordon Neufeld, a sometime co-author, he said once beautifully, he said, we shall be saved in an ocean of tears, he said. That the tears of grief. There's a song by the band, Tears of Grief, Tears of Rage. And the tears of grief are what save us. Grief comes in waves, or like a tide that comes in and out. It's not a once done and all phenomenon. But yeah, grief means, it's gone. It's never going to be any different, and at some point it wasn't that long ago that I realized not in the intellectual sense, which I already had always, but in the emotional sense. Yeah, my grandfather and grandmother died in Auschwitz in a gas chamber, naked, probably hugging each other as this toxic gas seeped into the room. And that happened. And that's never not going to have happened. But I don't have to hold on to it. And I don't have to believe that there's something I can do about that it happened. And Bessel van Der Kolk, the trauma psychiatrist, said to me once, Gabor, you don't have to drag Auschwitz around with you everywhere you go. And when he said it, I kind of got what he was talking about intellectually, but it took years for me to integrate it. In other words, that can have happened, but the meaning that you created about life is a result of it. You don't have to drag that around.
What supported you in the acceptance piece of that? If you don't mind me asking, a personal question.
A lot of failure, for one thing.
Yeah.
A lot of misery. A relationship with a wonderful woman that I've been married to for 53 years.
Yeah.
A lot of teachers like Rick and others. Healing work that I did with myself. In my case, psychedelic work. Some fairly undisciplined, but fairly recurrent spiritual work, all that, and then just witnessing what I've witnessed, all that supported me.
That's it for today's conversations, and I really appreciate all the experts who took the time to come on the show. What stands out to me from these conversations is how trauma, and particularly the form of trauma that we focused on today, is a process of adaptation for people. We develop these ways of being that make a lot of sense given unsafe circumstances. But the strategies that once kept us safe can then have consequences for us later in life. In particular, there was this running theme of disconnection from our feelings, from other people, and from our authentic sense of who we are. And there's this poetic and kind of tragic irony that particularly when it comes to developmental trauma, it's often the behaviors a child adopts to attempt to stay connected that then lead to the adult version of that child feeling more disconnected than ever. This was also, at least to me, a very hopeful episode. Whether it's through feeling into the body, grieving what we've lost, repairing our relationships, or examining the systems that shaped us, there is so much that we can do to feel better, to recover, to build strong relationships, and to reconnect with ourselves. We can't change what happened, but we can, at least to some extent, understand it, contextualize it, and integrate it. We can slowly return to our emotions, especially the ones that we've repressed, and reconnect with our inner experience. What am I feeling? What do I want? What do I care about? Who am I these days? And as Dr. Hom emphasized in particular, this whole process can include a lot of grief for people. If you take one thing from this, I hope it's an appreciation for both the impact of these experiences and the opportunities we have to feel better today. Just about everyone carries patterns of protection and adaptation, and things usually start to go better when we relate to those patterns with understanding rather than just a lot of judgment. If you made it this far, I hope you'll take a moment to let me know how you felt about this episode. Maybe leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple. You can also subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, or you can join us on Patreon or Substack. And I've included links to all of that in the description of today's episode. So, once again, until next time, thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon.